Folks, we're going to have to rip the Band-Aid off. The Winnipeg Jets kind of sort of suck right now. It won't last forever, but it doesn't feel great in the moment.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. But most of all, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is going to be not a fun one for the Jets. I think a lot of us are probably starting to feel a little bit pissed off. You're probably looking for a place to vent. This is one of those rare games where I'm actually pretty irritated with the team's effort. It's not often that I'll say that I felt the Jets just didn't put forth a good game in terms of spirit, in terms of emotion, in terms of effort. And I think that there's a lot of extenuating circumstances around this. And I think, it's fair to say the Jets are tired, but this game just simply was not good enough. And it wasn't just the players. The coaching staff did not do a good job either. From top to bottom, I thought that this was, quite frankly, one of the worst games the Jets have played this year. They got absolutely humiliated on home ice by the Blues after they've already lost 3 straight games. They needed to come home and have some sort of a response. And this is what we got. Just not acceptable. We'll dive into what went wrong in just a quick moment. But before we go any further, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at FanDuel. Tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel because you can start the season with a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, like I said, I don't usually rant a lot on this podcast or whatever. Even when the Jets do poorly, I'm usually pretty balanced. I don't rake the team over the coals. But tonight's effort, I thought, was really just not it. The fact that people were booing the team off the ice, I usually don't advocate for doing that. But tonight, I think it was justified. The team has to know that it needs to be better. What they put out there in tonight's game was, in my mind, just not acceptable. The lack of speed, the lack of pushback, some of the really lazy plays that we saw, just really frustrating all around. And I know that they, I'm sure, are irritated. I'm sure that they're frustrated with themselves. And, with the team having put together such a good start to the season, I don't want to let this overshadow things as they are. But the Jets just can't keep playing like this. This is like the 7th or 8th straight game where the Jets have generally been outplayed. It's not like every game that they're getting dominated, but for the most part, they're not winning the 5v5 battles. And when they're being pressured, either by having their space taken away at the blue line, teams kind of keying up on how the Jets are creating offense from low to high, it makes it a lot easier for opponents to defend against Winnipeg. The Jets aren't adjusting. Their 5v5 game has slowed down. The power play is sputtering a little bit on some of these zone entries and setups. The injuries that the Jets are playing with are really starting to put strain on everyone else. And a lot of the line combos just aren't really working. And so this really feels like a team that is not necessarily spiraling out of control, but they're definitely heading in the wrong direction. I think the best and most positive way to look at it is that it's better that it's happening now at the start of the season rather than when you're halfway through or past it and you're at a point where you're in the home stretch and you don't really have time to make adjustments. I'd much rather this sort of setback be at the start of the season when the team can have plenty of time to experiment. But as you'll see in this episode later, what's going to have to happen with this team is a paradigm shift. Winnipeg really needs to rethink the way that it's organizing its lineups, and it's got to get away from some stuff that it's been doing for many, many years, and it's going to have some ownership from the players. But obviously, that's a conversation for later this episode. I think for this game, what can we really say, right? Brad Lambert had his first game this season as a Jet. Obviously, he made his NHL debut last year. This was his first chance, start to back, getting a real shot in the top 6. And what did he do with it? Well, I thought that he showed fun flashes. There were some good skating moments. I thought he had some nice passes. And then there were moments where, he did get out-muscled in the corners, and you could kind of see that as a perhaps less physically matured player, he wasn't quite at the races. He definitely had some really good moments, and I think the best shift came on that odd man rush where he and Perfetti had a great give and go that led to a quick handoff on the wing to Velarde. Velarde, I guess, just wasn't really expecting Perfetti's pass to come across and wasn't really in position. Didn't take advantage of it, and that was a big missed opportunity that perhaps could have changed the nature of the game. But I thought that line's first period with Perfetti, Lambert, and Velarde for the first 20 minutes was great. They had some really fun shifts. I thought they were energetic, and much like the rest of the team, they looked up for the challenge. But then, second period, things started to slow down. No one was really creating much of anything, and that included the Lambert line. And then in the third period, the Jets scrambled the lines again, but they didn't just scramble them. They put them back to what they usually are, which is irritating in its own right, because we all know that Connor Scheifele Velarde doesn't really do all that well. Going back to Perfetti, Nemesnikov, and Lambert, Lambert in place of Ehlers, on paper, sure, fine, but it didn't really do anything. In fact, the Jets just continued to get outplayed and really didn't do much of anything until the final few minutes. So, sure, it wasn't a shutout. The Jets did score a goal, Scheifele's first in 7 games, but it was, not really something that I think should be celebrated. If anything, I think the Jets should really be disappointed in themselves. This wasn't a good response game. The Jets have needed to have some kind of an answer for the recent losing streak. And I'm not going to sit here and try and blow this out of proportion, but this should just be one of those wake-up calls to the Jets that what they're doing and how they're being coached, the lines that they're using, all of this stuff that's really been hidden by a great power play and goaltending. Eventually, when you stop finishing on like half of your chances, this stuff's going to start to become a bigger problem. And it was stuff that I pointed out at the beginning of the season. I know the hot record kind of masked some of it, but I was kind of concerned quietly that at some point it would catch up. And unfortunately, it really has. Again, it's happening earlier than it has in years past. And I think it's stuff that's very fixable, but it's going to take a couple of really big decisions from the Jets. I think Winnipeg, quite frankly, is unwilling to make some of these changes for some very political and locker room reasons. But at some point, somebody's going to have to be the adult in the room and make a hard call, because as it is right now, the way that the Jets are playing and the way that they're losing games when really they should be at least competitive, it's very frustrating, and it's not good to see the team doing some of the same mistakes that it's made over the past several years. Winnipeg is trying to, chase its own shadow at times, and I think that it gets itself in trouble thinking that it can, adjust around the margins rather than getting to what really lies at the core heart of some of this team's biggest challenges. And I don't say this as somebody who thinks this team is bad. The fact that I'm so pissed off really should tell you that I think very highly of this team. The fact that I hold expectations up here and the fact that I felt that they were way down here should tell you that the Jets are a good team. Tonight's result does not change that, but there's a lot that they need to fix. There's stuff that they've been, maybe glossing over, and I've certainly glossed over it because, for a while they were winning and I thought maybe you could get away with it for a bit. But at some point I did think, as they start facing better and better teams, it's going to show up at some point. It's just happening a little sooner than I expected, partly because of the schedule and who they're facing on this road trip. So really tough game. If you're wondering how Heinola and Stanley did, yeah. Arniel tried to do too much, got a little too cute, and made some bad mistakes while trying to make some big breakout passes and stuff. And it was also not really helped by the fact that he would pass to Stanley, and Stanley just handled the puck like a hand grenade. It was a horrific night for Stanley. At some point, the Jets are going to have to cut bait there. I just don't understand why they keep trying to make this happen. No one's really able to help Logan out of the trouble that he gets himself into. It's like having Lucas Sabisa on your blue line. He tries his hardest, he really does, but it's just not working out. And at some point, the Jets need to make a very tough choice and just let it go. You've got other guys on the roster who I think can do a pretty serviceable job. Otherwise, if there's anything else I can really say about this game, Yeah, I mean, it just was a real letdown, and what I thought was going to be a fun night for the Jets ended up being an exercise in futility. But we got to talk about a couple of other things. There's two players that probably need to spend some time, not benched, but healing up. Well, I guess you could call it a benching, but it's not performance related in the usual sense, right? This isn't a benching that's about them, looking just crappy. There's a reason that I think both of these guys are struggling, and it's Scheifele and DeMelo. But we'll chat about that in a little bit and why the Jets have a really big paradigm shift that they need to make here over the next couple of weeks. But before we go too much further, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports available to everyone. You just pick more or less than at least two players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. If you're wondering why PrizePicks should be your first choice, they always put their members first, and withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When your picks hit, you can get your money in as little as 15 minutes, and they even offer Venmo as an option to deposit and withdraw from your account. Best of all, if you have an injury, no problem. Your lineup will still stay active, and those lineups will still hit and cash out, even if it isn't perfect. If you get as little as 4 correct picks, you could still win 100 times your cash. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play that first $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's just guaranteed. If you're looking for some predictions, oh, gosh. Winnipeg, I mean, I guess Morrissey over half a point for the next couple of games. Same for the top line. I don't know. The Jets feel like if you're thinking about maybe a higher level bet, you could say that the team itself probably not doing that great. But you got to focus on the players, right? And I think for the Jets, Morrissey remains a safe bet. Scheifele, maybe. Connor feels like he's probably due. I'd probably look there if you're looking for some points overs. But otherwise, it's a long year, and maybe you want to cast some money on McDavid scoring instead. Either way, though, the only way that you can get in on the action is to download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Hey, friends, so welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we are chatting a little bit frustratedly about, how the Jets played. Obviously, the last couple of weeks have not been great. The Jets are like 3-7 in their last 10 games. It's just not good enough. Winnipeg knows this. I think the players know this. The coaching staff knows this. The front office probably has to too. I mean, for a team that started off so well, they're now in third place in the league. They are 3-7 in their last 10, 4-game losing streak, and stuff that I kind of pointed out as being a potential problem later in the season is already becoming an issue now. And the team really needs to overhaul the way that it's constructed, right? Not necessarily by making a ton of acquisitions or something, but in terms of the way that the lineups are arranged, at a bare minimum, you've got to revisit how you're doing your top six. The Lowry line was able to mask some of Winnipeg's 5v5 deficiencies for the first month or so, but that is definitely starting to fade. The Jets' top line, frankly, just isn't good. It's been inconsistent this year, which is better than it was last year, but this year it's just for the most part. I mean, the past several games against top-end opponents, what I said about it at the start of the year has unfortunately been true. They're just not good together, and it really starts with Connor and Scheifele playing together. I feel like I go blue in the face talking about the fact that while they are very skilled and they play really well when they have time and space, if you're facing top-end opponents and matchups, you just don't have that. And Scheifele and Connor end up bringing out the worst in each other, and Velarde's not really able to carry the rest of that burden. If you have Ehlers up there, it's a bit better. I wouldn't say it's perfect, and I wouldn't even really go so far as to say it would necessarily fix what's wrong with the team, but at least the puck gets up the ice faster. You maybe spend a little bit less time in your defensive zone, and Ehlers generally does a good job of finding his line mates for goals. But otherwise, yeah, the top line just has not been getting it done at all. Ehlers himself, when he was, healthy before the recent injury, by the way, he's out 7 to 10 days. So bit of a rough stretch without him. But like even him on the Nemesnikov line was very inconsistent. I wasn't really seeing the usual Nick that I'm used to. He had some really good rushes on many occasions, but it just felt like him on his line didn't really gel with how Perfetti and Nemesnikov were playing. Speaking of the Nemesnikov line, yeah, Nemesnikov cannot be your 2C. Heading into the postseason, the Jets are going to have to figure out something. I don't know that Lambert is necessarily going to be that solution. I thought he was fine in this game. I didn't really come away feeling like he had stolen the spot. There were definitely good flashes, and I think, if you give him a fair run of games, maybe you'll start to see a little more comfort at the NHL level, but I wasn't necessarily like shocked and blown away, which is kind of what you'd expect, right? It's going to take him some time if the Jets want to make him their 2C in the near future. Whether fair or not, though, the Jets kind of need Lambert to be good immediately, and I don't think that's really a reflection of Lambert so much as it is kind of where this team is right now. Winnipeg is definitely struggling to create at 5v5, and I think the Jets, they're searching for some sort of an answer, because I think Vlad has tried his best. At first line center tonight, he wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, but he's not really a guy who should be in your top six. I think as like an elite bottom six player, that's really where Vlad's value is going to shine. But in the second line role or even the first line role, it's just not working. And alongside Perfetti and Ehlers when he's healthy, or Lambert in tonight's case, there's just not the sort of chemistry and skill and speed that you kind of need. And so it's asking so much of the Lowry line and the Kupari lines to carry up the burden. And like the Lowry line isn't really doing that well recently. At 5v5, they're still getting good forechecking and offensive zone time, but offensively, it's not like they're really scoring that much. And I did say that I thought this would start to become a problem. They were scoring like every other game early in the season, sometimes multiple games in a row. And I was just like, yeah, but you look at their career scoring records together or even apart, and there's just not really a sign that they were going to be able to sustain, almost a point per game pace. And it's definitely trailed off, but now at times the Lowry line's just losing matchups. I think that they've been over-relied upon, and the Jets have kind of burned them out a little bit. Winnipeg sort of expects them to be, the breadwinners, and I think it's a little unfair when the top line really hasn't been pulling its weight. The Lowry line should be a good setup line rather than the one that has to do all of the heavy lifting and all of the scoring. And like the rest of the team just hasn't really been able to catch up. And I really kind of look at the coaching staff and ask them why they haven't started to adjust the way that this top nine works. I don't think that it's really the fault of any particular players here so much as it is the whole not really working the way it should. It's been a problem for years. Whether it's this coaching staff or a previous staff, they all seem to do a lot of the same things. And I think it's getting to the point where you can kind of tell that some of the players and stuff are also calling the shots. And I think if Scheifele is the one who's really dictating this Connor Scheifele thing, and Connor is also, helping to dictate this, somebody's going to have to sit them down and tell them the truth about how they're playing together. It's just unacceptable. They have good moments on the power play, and that's where I think they should absolutely play together. If there's an odd man situation and Connor and Scheifele are playing together, I have zero qualms with that. I think that's great. That is when they are beyond lethal together. But if it's 5v5, they cannot be on the same line. That single thing that they have, unfortunately, unbalances the entire lineup, because then you have a top line that's really not winning many matchups. You have a second skill line that's doing okay at times, but is inconsistent. And you have all of your depth lines who have to carry the slack of a top six that sort of functions, kind of doesn't. So I think for the Jets, it's just very frustrating. And then you look at the defense and like the blue line, Winnipeg doesn't really have a lot of margin for error, and they keep relying upon Logan Stanley on the third pairing, which, Stanley, he's just not doing that well. He's worth at least a couple of penalties a game under most circumstances. Tonight, he actually didn't get called, which is a bit of a miracle. But otherwise, Logan, he really tries hard, but you see what he is, and he's like a seventh defender. And they're asking him to be like a number 5 or a number 6, and it's just not going well. Hanela tried to do too much and compensate, I think, for Stanley's issues and for his own quiet games. I think when he was actually quieter, he was more effective because he wasn't trying to force plays as much. But like the Jets, man, it just feels like there are so many different holes on the boat for them to plug. A bunch of leaks that are kind of springing up, and the bottom of the boat's starting to get a little too heavy for the Jets to carry. So Winnipeg really needs to think about how they're kind of doing load bearing here. I think that there are ways to improve this team internally, but the coaching staff has to be the one to step up and adjust. And so far, Arniel really hasn't been doing that recently. First part of the season, I thought he did a great job. As we're starting to get further and further towards the midway point, I'm not really as impressed. I feel like he's kind of doing some of the same stuff that Bonus and Maurice did, and I don't love it. I'm not going to say that I think it's entirely all him, but I am starting to question, whether I was maybe a little too generous in my praise at the start of the season. It's just strange. He feels like he's getting away from some of the stuff that made him successful in the first couple of weeks and months. But it is less than 30 games into the season. I'm not going to write him off for the team yet. I think that would be a huge mistake and very premature. The fact that I'm kind of telling you all of this is because I think that there is still plenty of time to get this team back up to speed, but it's going to take some real elbow grease. Now, one of the things I mentioned before is that the Jets kind of need to shut down DeMelo and Scheifele. DeMelo is the first time I'm really saying this. This is, it's getting to be too much for, I think, this team to really handle both he and Scheifele looking like they're injured. We'll talk about that and what the Jets could even do in the event that both of them would need to sit for a few weeks because, let's be real, the Jets don't exactly have a lot of internal options for either of them, although I think Winnipeg may have one who could step up in DeMelo's place. But we'll chat about that in a brief moment. Before we go too much further, though, just wanted to circle back to tonight's title sponsors at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. If you're watching, some of the upcoming Ravens games, or maybe you're a Commanders fan, for a lot of you Winnipeggers, you're probably, I guess, Vikings fans for the most part. Minnesota's had a bit of an up and down season, but the defense still looks pretty legit. Darnold has, managed to not give away games, generally speaking. And so, you know what? You're getting a hunch in the, middle of one of these games. Well, you can follow up those hunches by checking out the latest stats, viewing live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you're placing your bets. That's all at FanDuel.com. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. That's only at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for joining us in tonight's episode as we are sort of following up some thoughts that have kind of lingered from the past couple of weeks. The Jets have a lot of hard choices to make, but at some point, Winnipeg is going to have to make one of the hardest and have Scheifele and DeMelo miss time. They both do not look right. DeMelo is basically lost on half of his shifts. He's not winning battles. He's fumbling the puck into really dangerous areas. He's either turning it over or in some cases batting it blindly like he did across the crease, and it almost turned into a goal against. Other times he's making bad passes. He's getting caught, out of position and looking flat-footed. This is not the DeMelo that we're used to. Dylan is usually very positionally sound. He's a smart player, and he looks like he's half the guy he usually is, which a lot of folks are thinking is an injury. I haven't really seen a lot about his health, but if it really is an injury, and I think that would go a lot more to explaining what's going on than just age-related stuff, then you got to sit him. Like, he cannot play. I think he's dragging down Morrissey. He's dragging down the team, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. There's no question that DeMelo loves this team and seriously lays it all out when he plays, but right now he is a net negative. I've never really said this about DeMelo before in a sustained way. Usually if he has a dip, I always believe that he comes back from it. But if this health thing is continuing to nag him and he's really just injured, I think it wouldn't be the worst to use this very big lead that the Jets have towards the top of the league. And again, rest him. You don't have to worry so much about DeMelo going down because you've got a guy in either Miller or Coughlin that I think can actually do the job. Coughlin, I thought, looked really good against Vegas. His puck movement, his defensive gapping, his reads, and the way that he calmly forced turnovers and used interior positioning, I thought looked really good. Again, it's a one-game sample, but like in previous years, Coughlin actually did pretty well when he was a Knight himself. And it seemed like, he was an NHLer in his first game of the season. I came away thinking immediately that he was our best right-handed defender. He and Miller probably tie for that title. I think Miller, for me, has maybe been a little trigger happy. It's one of his best traits, but it also at times means that he maybe passes up on a good, deferral when he should, which, sometimes gets him into trouble. Sometimes he'll slap the puck into a defender or a forward and it gets countered at the blue line. But for the most part, I mean, Miller's done a pretty good job, right? Past couple of weeks, it's been a little rougher. I attribute that to maybe some of the changing cast of players with him, also just his own performance at times. But I think if you have either him or Coughlin up there with Morrissey, and you maybe either demote DeMelo to the third pairing, or just bench DeMelo for a little bit, I think you can absolutely still do that and probably get away with it. The one that the Jets just don't have a replacement for, but probably still need to bite the bullet with anyways, is Scheifele. I know Mark scored his first goal of the night, and in the past couple of games, I think defensively and physically he's been more engaged. He's still not right. It's very obvious. He's barely taking faceoffs. He's just not been the player that you usually see. He had a couple of good passes in this game against the Blues, but against faster opponents, he just looks like a shell of himself. Scheifele is one of those players where you know that the creativity and skill is there. So if he's not executing and it really is like an injury, which in this case it absolutely is, you don't really want to risk either aggravating it to a worse point or, having him continue this whole charade of playing through this injury when it's clear that he's not able to contribute. Right now, Scheifele is kind of a negative. I don't like to say that either, and I don't like to say it in the derogatory sense, but like both he and DeMelo are injured to the point of not really being worth putting out there, not with what the long-term goal is. The regular season record is nice, don't get me wrong, but the eye on the prize is always for a good playoff seed. And like the Jets can still get that even if they have both DeMelo and Scheifele sidelined for a bit. I would much rather have both of them sit for a few weeks while the Jets are, towards the start of the season and still figuring things out and maybe making some adjustments and arrangements than doing this later in the year where maybe they don't even heal up in time for the postseason. I think the Jets have lots of opportunities to perhaps set them aside, let them heal up, and ask some other guys to come up and stay in their stead. And I think the Jets could probably still tread water. I think you have an 18-8 record. Make the most of it. The Jets have built themselves a great lead. They've been very good at the top. And if you're in a bad stretch right now where you're really not winning games anyways, why force your players who aren't doing that well and who are very injured to keep going through that? Rest them up for the second half of the year where they can be much more impactful. I think that's my focus. Scheifele's not going to the Four Nations tournament anyways, so just let him heal. It's time that you have to let him rest. Maybe the holiday break will be good for him too. I think, you want him to have a much better wrist. You want him to feel up to speed because the second half of the season and the playoffs are where you really want the Jets to shine. And I think that there's a lot of time for both him and DeMelo to get back up to speed and get healthy for the second half. That's my main focus. I want the Jets to win more than one playoff game. I don't really care how they get to the postseason, so long as they don't have to go through the wild card. I think that would probably not be great, but get to the postseason, get through the first round, and do so at least healthy enough, right? But curious to know how you're feeling about all of this. Are you okay with them continuing to play as they are? Would you bench both of them? Give me your thoughts or comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_on Winnipeg or LO_Winnipeg Jets on Twitter. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow with more Jets coverage, so see you then. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.